I'm Tony Ruiz of Gold Derby here with Ambika Mod, who plays Emma Morley in the new Netflix adaptation of One Day. And Ambika, one of the things that I read was that you were initially reluctant to even audition for this. And rather than talk about why, what was it that made you ultimately decide to go through with it?
Um, I don't know. It was first of all, it was just like a feeling in the night that I'd made a terrible, terrible mistake. And then uh honestly, I think it was just returning to like m- my nostalgic love of the book. And how much the book had meant to me when I was young, and like how obsessed with the characters I was, and like I loved the film as well. Like when I saw it when I was like 16 or however old I was when it came out. And um I think it was just re-remembering that rather than like all the other stuff I'd been focusing on that sort of caused me to turn it down. Um and then also I suppose like the team and the people doing it, like they've all got such a impressive body of work behind them, and it just kind of felt like a no-brainer. And I was like, what am I thinking? Like, why did I turn this down? It's so insane to me. um and it's so all like it's scary that like this almost could not have been mine. But I think maybe I just needed a moment to realize actually like this story is pretty special, and roles like this only come round once in a while.
Well, you talk about how important the book had been to you and the film. Did you then have to put those things aside and look at it through just fresh eyes?
I reread the book a lot. I read it when I was auditioning. I reread it uh twice while I was just before while we were starting filming. Um, I didn't rewatch the film at all, and I still haven't rewatched the film just because I thought I didn't want another interpretation in my head. Whereas the book is so helpful because it just gives you so much internal dialogue, gives you so much context. It really builds the world for you. That perhaps on another job you might have to start from scratch, and actually there are just fewer blanks to fill in. Um, and yeah, that was just a really helpful tool throughout the whole shoot. And because obviously like most of the scripts hadn't been written when we started shooting, like it just helped to know like what the journey was going to be, especially because we shot episode 14 at the beginning as well.
When you're doing 14 episodes of something that only takes place, over the course of, each episode is a different year, do you
Mm.
as an actor have to go in and fill in the what's happened in the previous
Yeah,
364 days?
yeah.
And what does that even entail?
Well, I always started with the book because the book is so good at that, giving context. It's so good at giving context in terms of like not only physical events, but like how relationships have changed, how things have developed, major things that have happened that we don't ever witness. So that was really, really helpful. And so I would always go through and like jot down the major events that happened or the ways in which relationships had changed. And then if there were like extra questions or like extra gaps, like I would just fill those in myself and make them up. Um, or I would, that would be a discussion with the director. Um, but it was just, yeah, I think it was very important to an extent. I mean, you didn't need to know massively in detail what's been happening every single day of the 365-day calendar year, but um, it was definitely helpful to know in terms of the events that pertain to what's happening in the episode and how that all went down.
Well, and what I find so impressive about just the acting in this show on both yours and Leo's part is that in that space of time between the times they see each other, the physicality of the character seems to change. There's the maturity, and I'm curious as to how conscious you were of that, or was that just something that kind of came naturally as you're going through each stage of Emma's life?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, I've obviously like the more I've sort of talked about this show in retrospect after it's come out, like, I've been asked about this, and I genuinely don't remember it being that conscious, that it being that conscious choice to like change the way I hold myself or change the way I speak or change the way I walk. Um because also I think that that's a pretty naff interpretation of aging. And it really does vary for everyone. I think, you know, age and age as a number of maturity, like there's not necessarily a correlation between the two. It's different for different people in different stages of life and everything. I think, you know, I always like give so much credit to the writing. I think in a way it did a lot of the heavy lifting for us because like the way that the characters speak changes so much over the course of the episode. So that is so helpful in itself. And then obviously things like hair and makeup, like that naturally just alters the way that you might hold yourself and your disposition. But for me, like what I found helpful thinking about that progression was it was always like Emma's relationship to herself. And that was like something that I tried to track. That was always my through line. This thinking, how does Emma feel about herself on this day? And how does that affect the way that she's going to interact with other people? And then I think just knowing the character so well, doing my homework in terms of, as you brought up, the context, like you've just got to show up and trust that it's embedded itself in ways. And thankfully it seems to have done that. Yeah.
Well, and that trust is clearly so important between you and Leo. And there's always that saying that chemistry can't be manufactured and chemistry can't be faked. How early in the process did you guys know that your pairing was going to work?
I mean, there wasn't like a moment where it was like a light bulb, like, oh my God, we've hit gold with this. Like, I mean, first of all, like the team, the cast, the creative team, when they cast this, like they really put us all through our paces. Like this was a grueling audition process, and they really did their due diligence, and not only finding the right Emma and the right Dexter, but also making sure that they, as a pair, like were, you know, that was like a cream of the crop pairing. So I always want to give that like most of the credit because I think, as you say, like you can't manufacture chemistry, like it's either there or it's not. So a lot of that came in the casting process. But you know, we didn't have that much time. But like, I had just come off a job. I finished a job like a week before we started like filming. He had just finished on a job. So like we were both sort of thrown into this thing. And we were just lucky that we sort of became friends quite quickly. And, you know, we were spending a lot of time together. We were working together, having to like perform really meaty, long, complex scenes together, almost like theatre. So we all sort of had a bond like that, and that like an almost theatrical bond that, you know, doesn't always manifest itself on, you know, film and TV. So that was like a really interesting experience, but it's not something we ever really had to think about. It was just there, and we were so lucky that we actually got on because how terrible would it have been if we hated each other's guts? That would have been a pretty difficult shooting process. Yeah.
Well, and but it also brings to mind, you know, this bond between Dexter and Emma. What do you think it is that just ties these two together? I mean, because at different points, they're both making decisions, some good, some bad, some harmful, some self-destructive, but yet there's this bond that connects them. What do you think that is?
I think it's a lot of things. And I obviously, like I said before, like I've been thinking on this more and more as I've been asked about it. But um, I think I don't know. I think at the heart of it, like they are just able to be themselves with each other, as like simple and maybe cliche as that sounds. But you know, she's particularly um, she's very self-defensive. Like she can be prickly at times. You know, she's always sort of like using her humor as her defense mechanism, as her armor. And he's really soft to all of that. Like he really like takes it all in his stride and is really soft with her, despite all that you know, that harshness that she carries. Whereas, you know, on the other hand, like he is from a world that she is not familiar with, like just the sheer amount of privilege that I suppose governs every aspect of his identity. And I think she is the only one who calls him out on it and who speaks truth to his power, and um that's why I think he values her opinion so much, because he knows that when he's done something genuinely good and genuinely right, she will tell him. And so I think they both make each other better in that way. But it's a very, very complex relationship. And actually, what I love about the first episode is it's not this like cosmic union. It's not like two people meet and bam, 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 chemistry, like sparks flying. Like it's actually really awkward and stilted, and there are so many missed opportunities. And I actually think that's, much more indicative of how real life relationships happen, whether that's romantic or friendships. And it's beautiful how a sheer accident of two people come together like has an impact over 20 years.
Yeah, and also that she also, I think, needs him to call her out at times.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah, for
we all
sure.
need that person who's
Yeah.
going to call us out on our stuff.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Like he's constantly calling her out for like being self-deprecating and making fun of him. And yeah, but I think that's all to do with like he like over time I think softens her edges and makes her a bit more, I suppose, um allows her to be a bit more sincere, rather than like cringing at everything and finding everything embarrassing all the time, which is a very like British, I think, outlook to have.
Well, and I want to get to that, but first I want to ask, because you know the book so well and because you've seen the previous film. I mean, I will admit that I went into this completely blind,
Mm.
not having read the book or seen the previous film. So I'm along for the ride, and then the big thing happens in the second to last episode, which we all know,
Mm.
viewers who are familiar with the show will know what I'm talking about. And so I'm curious, knowing that that's coming, is there any way to prepare yourself for that, or do you just kind of give yourself to that moment?
Yeah, and you can't really prepare yourself, can you? Because the event as it, I mean, can I say what it is? I can say, yeah, Emma dies. She dies. She's gone. But it's very abrupt. Like it's very abrupt and it's a shock. So I don't think there's any way to really prepare yourself for that moment. And actually, like shooting that scene specifically, like was like practically a challenge. Like there was so many moving parts. Like it was very difficult physically. Um, so I didn't try to think about it too much. Um, I think what was more difficult to film was episode 14 and the aftermath, especially because we shot it at the beginning. So like we didn't really have a marker for like all the stuff in between and all having played all the stuff in between. But um I think, when we were filming episode 14, like I just felt devastated every single day. I just felt so upset and sad. Like I know everyone that says that they've had a hot like a such an upsetting time watching this show, and I apologize for that. I really do, but like even when I watched it, I was just like bawling like a baby and was not okay for like days afterwards. Um, so it's like, yeah, it was a hard process filming it as well as watching it, because um
Can
this
I
is
ask you actually? Can I ask
yeah
you actually? When you say that you were filming episode 14 first, was one of the first things you shot like that scene where he's just sitting with your stuff
yeah,
and
that was like within the first month and a half or something of
wow.
shooting. Yeah, yeah, it was. Yeah, so we shot 1, 2, 3 and 14 within the first few months. It was a real like, yeah, um trial by fire kind of thing. Uh and it was, yeah, and it was like that feeling of just like playing episode 1 and then playing episode 14. Well, that was really, it was really sad, without like just without wanting to sugarcoat it or like be more profound about it. It was just really, really sad. But we did just kind of have to jump in the deep end and be really bold. And like we had, Molly, our director, just had an amazing, I suppose, vision of the whole thing and like of topping and tailing the series. And we just followed her guidance and the guidance of the writing. But yeah, it was tough. It was really tough.
Well, and we talk about, yeah, it was sad, but it clearly resonated, particularly with how viewers have responded to the show, and the fact that this does seem to, cross, all sorts of boundaries in terms of like, it just being a British show, or it just being this, or it just being that. I'm a high school teacher. It's resonated with all different age groups that I interact with. And so I'm wondering what do you see as kind of like the reason why it's done that?
I think the show is just the show and the book is just life. Um, it is just life in all its spectrums. I mean, as much as like we call it a rom-com or a romance, a will they, won't they, whatever you like, I think at the heart of it, like it's so much more than that. And I find those labels a bit reductive because there's so much of this show that isn't Emma and Dexter and will they get together. Um, this actually fundamentally is just about two friends growing up in tandem. And the fact that you just see every aspect of their lives, like death, growing up, marriage, having kids, like job failure, breakups, weddings, all of it. Like it's ripe for the taking. And like I mean, even if you're I think what's really special about this story is that I think no matter what age you are, you will have a different relationship every time you come back to it. That's what I mean, I'd be really interested to see like what your high school students think of it if they were to watch it in 10 years time, because I was like 13, 14 when I read the book for the first time, and then I reread it again when I was like 26, and like it had a completely different meaning and resonance for me at that age. So yeah, I hope that there's, layers in it and depth in it for people to keep coming back to it, because it's just life in all its technicolor, I think.
Couldn't be better said. And life certainly is technicolor.
Mm.
Ambika, so great to talk to you. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the Emmys, and stay tuned for interviews with more contenders throughout the coming weeks. Ambika Mod, a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Lovely to talk to you.